In 1910, Warsaw was a city of two worlds, Catholic and Jewish, Polish and Yiddish, woven together by centuries of shared history. Into this tapestry was born Irena Sendler, whose father taught her that a person's worth lay not in their faith or heritage, but in their humanity. Dr. Stanislaw Krasnowski was a physician who treated the poorest Jewish patients those other doctors refused to see. When he died of typhus contracted from his patients, the Jewish community honored him with words carved in Hebrew. A righteous man is the foundation of the world. By the 1930s, anti-Semitism was rising across Europe. At Warsaw University, Jewish students were forced to sit separately from Polish students. But Irena, now a graduate student in social welfare, refused to accept this segregation, deliberately sitting in the Jewish section. "I will not participate in this discrimination," she declared to the astonished classroom. For her act of solidarity, Irena was suspended from the university. But she had found her calling, standing with the vulnerable against those who would oppress them. As a social worker in Warsaw's poorest districts, Irena Sendler devoted herself to helping Jewish families navigate an increasingly hostile world. Her father's example guided her every action. She couldn't have known that these early acts of compassion were preparing her for the greatest test of her life. September 1st, 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland with overwhelming force. In 18 days, the independent nation of Poland ceased to exist, crushed beneath the Wehrmacht's advance. For Warsaw's 350,000 Jewish residents, nearly 1/3 of the city's population, the Nazi occupation brought immediate terror. Anti-Jewish laws multiplied. Jews couldn't use public transport, enter parks, or practice their professions. Yellow stars became mandatory. Curfews trapped families in their homes, but these restrictions were only the beginning of Hitler's plans for Warsaw's Jews. In October 1940, the Nazis announced that all of Warsaw's Jews would be forced into a ghetto, a walled prison measuring just over 1 square mile. 400,000 human beings would be compressed into a space that had previously housed 40,000. The wall rose like a monument to human cruelty. Families were given mere hours to abandon their homes, their businesses, their entire lives, carrying only what they could hold in their trembling hands. Inside the ghetto, hell on earth had been created. Families of 8 or 10 were crammed into single rooms without sanitation. Starvation rations provided fewer than 200 calories per day. Disease ran rampant. Every day, hundreds died from hunger, typhus, and despair. Irena Sendler could have looked away, could have told herself there was nothing she could do. Instead, she found a way inside. Using her position in Warsaw's social welfare department, Irena obtained official passes to enter the ghetto, ostensibly to monitor for infectious diseases like typhus. But her true mission was far more dangerous than any medical inspection. At first, Irena and her colleagues smuggled food, medicine, and money into the ghetto, but as conditions worsened, it became clear that resources alone wouldn't save these children. They needed to escape entirely. Irena began the most audacious rescue operation of the Holocaust. Children were smuggled out in coffins and toolboxes, hidden in suitcases and potato sacks. Some crawled through sewage pipes beneath city streets. Others were carried past German guards in baskets of dirty laundry, their silence ensured by sedatives when necessary. Older children escaped through buildings that straddled the ghetto walls, the courthouse, a church, even through connected cellars. Each rescue required split, second timing, and nerves of steel, with death awaiting anyone caught in the act. But Irena understood that saving children's lives was only half the battle. She was determined to preserve their identities, to give them hope of reuniting with their families after the war. On tissue, thin cigarette paper, she recorded each child's real name, false name, and current location. These precious records were buried in glass jars beneath an apple tree in her friend's garden. The rescued children were placed with Catholic families in convents and orphanages across Poland. They were given new names, new histories, entirely new lives. Many were too young to remember their real identities. The most heartbreaking part of Irena's work was convincing parents to part with their children. She was asking them to trust a stranger with their most precious possession, often with no promise of reunion. "How do I know I'll ever see him again?" one father asked, his voice breaking. "You don't," she admitted quietly, "but if he stays here, you know you'll lose him forever." The psychological toll was enormous. Irena later wrote, "Those scenes over the years haunt me. Sometimes I still hear the desperation in their voices, the sound of mothers weeping as they surrender their babies." In July 1942, the Nazis began the final liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto. Every day, thousands of Jews were loaded onto cattle cars bound for the Treblinka death camp. Irena's work took on desperate urgency as time ran out. Irena joined forces with Nini Goda, the Polish Council to Aid Jews. This underground organization provided the money, forged documents, and safe houses that made her rescue operations possible on a larger scale. By 1943, Irena Sendler and her team had smuggled over 2,000 children from the Warsaw Ghetto, but their remarkable success would also prove to be their downfall. The Gestapo captured Irena Sendler, but her most precious secret, the names and locations of over 2,000 children, remained safe in her friends' hands. For 3 months, the Gestapo tortured Irena with systematic brutality. They broke her legs and arms with iron bars. They beat her unconscious repeatedly, but they could not break her spirit or extract a single name from her lips. On January 20, 1944, Irena Sendler was sentenced to death by firing squad. She had saved over 2,000 children, and now she would pay the ultimate price for her heroism. But as Irena walked toward what seemed certain death, a miracle occurred. A German officer diverted her from the execution yard at the last possible moment. Nigoda had paid an enormous bribe to secure her release. That night, as loudspeakers announced her death throughout Warsaw, Irena Sendler was very much alive and already planning to continue her work from hiding. From hiding, Irena continued to coordinate rescue operations until Germany's defeat in 1945. When the war ended, Irena retrieved her buried jars and began the painstaking work of reuniting families. Tragically, most of the children she had saved were now orphans, their parents murdered in the death camps. Under Poland's communist government, Irena's story was systematically suppressed. For decades, she lived in obscurity, working as a nurse and raising her own family. Few people knew that this gentle grandmother had performed one of history's greatest acts of heroism. In 1999, 4 students from Kansas discovered Irena's story while researching Holocaust heroes. Their school play, Life in a Jar, brought her story to the world's attention. Finally, the world recognized what the children she saved had always known, that Irena Sendler was a hero of the highest order. Irena Sendler died in 2008 at the age of 98. To the very end, she insisted she had done nothing extraordinary, that any decent person would have acted as she did when faced with such suffering. But the 500 children she saved, and their children's children, know differently. Today, an estimated 9,000 people owe their lives to the courage of one Polish social worker who chose to act when others looked away. Irena Sendler's grave bears a simple inscription, "Mother to the children of the Holocaust," but her true monument lives in the thousands of lives she saved and the eternal example she set for humanity. In an age when we often feel powerless against the world's cruelties, Irena Sendler reminds us that one person, armed with nothing but courage and compassion, can indeed save the world, one child at a time.